Hey guys, and welcome back to not another episode of This Is Your Captain Speaking. This is an episode of I already messed it up, Marketing Masters podcast. And we're going to leave that in. I'm not going to edit it out because I was already told by Johanna, who's on the marketing team here, she said, you're definitely going to mess it up. And I said I wouldn't, and I did immediately. We've changed the name of the podcast. It's now called Marketing Masters. It's obviously going to take me a little bit of a longer time to master that, obviously, as a marketer. But however, today we'll get straight to our guest. I'm super excited to have someone on today that's going to be going through a really interesting conversation today. Sonia Thompson is an inclusive brand strategist, coach, educator, keynote speaker, and CEO of the Thompson Media Group. In the past, Sonia has worked for companies such as Johnson & Johnson, GSK, so GlaxoSmithKline, and Pfizer. I see you were at Johnson & Johnson for 9 years as well, so went up through the ranks there in Johnson & Johnson as well, looking at your career. So went from working for these massive pharma companies then to founding our own business, which is super interesting as well. I want you to tell us a little bit more about that now in a minute.
Sure.
And as I mentioned before, Sonia is very all about the topic around inclusive marketing and also runs her own podcast called the Inclusion of Marketing Podcast, which is also on the HubSpot podcast network as well as the YouTube podcast network, which is super interesting. So I want to learn all about all these things. But before we do that, welcome, Sonia. Really happy to have you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And super excited to be here and on the first show with the new name.
Yes. And hopefully I'll get it right for the second show. So, hey, tell me a little bit about what you're doing. What do you guys do at Thompson Media? Give me the rundown.
Sure. So basically, I help brands attract a bigger, more diverse, and fiercely loyal customer base. I am someone, and I help them do that with inclusive marketing. I am someone with a lot of differences. And as a result of that, I have been a very frustrated consumer for much of my life. I am a Black woman. I follow a gluten-free diet for health reasons. I'm in a mixed race, multicultural marriage. I'm from the US. My husband is from Argentina. We've got this mixed race bilingual toddler who's 4 going on 24, right? There are a lot of things that have impacted me as a consumer over the course of my life. I'm left-handed, right? And so that plays into things sometimes. As a consumer, I remember just all the trouble I used to have with scissors growing up and all those things. For years, brands just haven't done a very good job of supporting people, serving people who don't fit into what is sort of quote unquote thought of as the mainstream. People with differences have existed for forever, right? It's just that brands, I don't want to say they couldn't be bothered, but in some instances, it's like they couldn't be bothered, or it was just easier for them to focus their efforts on a specific group of people and not acknowledge really the ways in which people are different. That's changing now because differences are more and more popping up. But at the same time, consumers are starting to really demand that brands cater to their needs. Consumers aren't really willing anymore to say, all right, I'll just take what I can get, right? Like they're just like, no. So I really help brands figure out and intentionally decide, because in most instances, people aren't being malicious about not serving people. It's more of they just haven't chosen or acknowledged the different identities that people have. And as a result, their marketing excludes, pushes people away versus makes more people feel seen. So that's what I do. I help brands see more people and actually, as a result, convert more people.
So actually, that's the whole promise of marketing in any case, right? So to get more conversions, get more people buying your products, it could make yourself attractive to more people. That's what marketing should be.
That's what it is. And so we call it inclusive marketing now to give it a name because so many people aren't marketing inclusively. But really what we want people to do is just do marketing well.
That's the thing. Yeah, that's what it sounds like. It's like, it just sounds like good marketing.
Yes, it's exactly what it is.
Okay, interesting. So let's talk a little bit about or first of all, before we get into that point, bilingual kid. I'm in the same boat. I live in Austria. I'm Irish. I'm married to an Austrian lady. We also have, she's now older now. She's 8, but it's also this how people walk into this house and say, "What language are you guys like? What is this mess?" You know?
Yeah, and it's a lot. So my husband is a we met and married in Argentina. That's where my daughter was born. So he's been here in the US for 3 years. And so he's still really working on English. So in our household, we only speak Spanish. I only speak Spanish to my daughter. And she understands Spanish and she speaks Spanish, but really it's Spanglish that she's speaking, right? So it's a bit
Yeah.
of a mix.
Get used to that. Get used to that. It's mostly German in this house, and everyone's
Mhm.
screaming German at me, and I'm screaming back in English. That's basically how it works. Right? So yeah, no, I understand. I understand. So okay, so let's get into the inclusive marketing thing a little bit.
Mhm.
Like I think you've already gone through like what it is, right? So
Mhm.
it's reaching out to maybe underserved communities and underserved people in the population that typically wouldn't be focused on from a marketing perspective, and trying to deliver a message to them to also get them on board. Correct?
Right, right. And I think part of the where people fall short a little bit is they underestimate how just the ways in which people are different. I think the thing that people most often go to race, gender, ethnicity, and it might be different in Europe in terms of like what those markers for or dimensions of diversity are. But it's so much more than that. A lot of times it's age. In the US, we have a very much aging population. I think I saw the numbers yesterday. 21% of our population is 60 or older, right? And they're often forgotten. There's body size, body type. Of course, there's sexual orientation, things like that. A lot of times people are even forgetting about family makeup. Just because what does a traditional family look like? And most kids don't live in a traditional household, right? And so are we taking all those types of things into consideration? Because those are the things that make people feel seen and like they belong with you.
Yeah, and if you feel seen and you feel like you belong, then you're most likely to go and buy that product. That's just typically how it
Absolutely.
works, right?
Yeah.
So what are some companies that you would have? I can think of some examples off the top of my head. Like for example, Dove. You know, Dove.
Mhm.
They do this like what would even beauty products, right?
Yeah.
Like what are some brands that would stick out to you that have done a particularly good job of this in recent times?
I love Rihanna's brands. So she's got, of course, Fenty Beauty, which that was one of the pioneers in really like putting inclusive marketing on the map because whenever she launched with 40 shades of foundation to accommodate that people all around the world have different shades. And what doesn't matter what shade you are, people who like makeup, right? And so and previously that wasn't the case. What I love about that in particular is whenever she launched with those 40 shades, that became the new industry standard. So whereas previously let's say there were 20 shades, now so many of the other brands in that industry are now having 40 shades as well because they saw the reception and the response. Her other brand is Savage X Fenty, which is like a lingerie brand. And one of the wonderful things about that, whenever you look at it, is all the different body sizes that are represented and even the different models that she uses. If you've ever seen one of the fashion shows, they used to make this big to do about like their fashion shows. They used to be on like Amazon Prime, like this big event, like the Victoria's Secret fashion show used to be. And there was, there's people of all sizes. There was a pregnant woman. There are men. There are models, like well-known models that and then also people that you might know. There are people with disabilities. It just ran the gamut of just because no matter what kind of body you have or who you are, she wanted to make people have the ability to feel sexy in the things that they were wearing. And just because you have something that makes you different doesn't change your core need or the desires that you have. So I really love the approach that she's taken, in which she is like a inclusion for all. Our products are for everybody type of person. Now, I want to caveat this with inclusive marketing for most brands doesn't mean that you have to serve everyone, which I think kind of freaks people out a little bit because it just feels like it's very resource intensive, etc. And I think it's just helpful if you just take the time to figure out, okay, with the identities, with the resources that we have, what are the identities that we're going to focus on serving? So let's take Mr. Beast, for instance. Everybody, is like looking at Mr. Beast on YouTube, and all these things that he's doing. And one of the ways that he's done it, of course, is by expanding with the different languages. But he has to be very clear about these are the specific languages that we're going to serve and translate into. I think there's 11 languages that he's using. There's a lot more languages than that, right? But like, you have to be clear. These are the ones that we are going to cater to, and you go from there. And then over time, as you're able to, you can expand if you like. But it's more so about being intentional about choosing and then doing that well. And then whenever you can, expand out further.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, it's the same as any brand really going after like what you can't serve everything to everyone all the time. It's just not
Right.
possible, right?
Right.
And you'll fail actually if you try to serve your product to absolutely everyone. I see this. My experience. I don't come from the world of FMCG or consumer brands, right? I come from the world of B2B marketing. It's the exact same thing. Like if you go after every industry and every vertical, sub vertical within that industry, you'll ultimately fail because you won't
Yeah.
be able to serve all of those people. It's just not possible, right? Like you're not going to be for everyone.
Right.
It's the matter of fact. That's why typically in B2B you also come up with an ICP, so your ideal customer profile, and then you
Absolutely.
try to hone in within that ideal customer profile and try to serve the needs within that ideal customer. And from what I'm hearing from you is it's very similar on that front. You're just trying to make that ideal customer more open, or based on the customers that your brand can serve. How can you get more people from more diverse backgrounds into that same brand, right?
Right. So one of the things whenever I am working with brands, one of the starting points is or the early starting points is focusing on who that ideal customer is. A lot of times brands have that defined, but what they haven't done is taken it a layer deeper and say, all right, because most of the times they have a psychographic profile, maybe some behavioral things, but they haven't gone to that other layer of some of the specifics, right? Does this profile of person include people who are Muslim? Does it include people who live in this country, in this time zone, right? Does it include people who have a disability, like all those different things? And not to say that you have to create an individual campaign for all those things, but it's just from time to time, if you can in your marketing, if you know that the people that you want to serve, that your ideal customer has these forms of differences, can you create something that just acknowledges that those differences exist, that and people feel seen? I was working, I listened to in a customer interview recently for a client that I'm working with. And there was a woman, it was for a consumer brand, and she was talking about how she's of Indian descent, and she was just raving about IKEA and how IKEA had done a Diwali campaign, and that everybody in her community were like sending around the videos of like or photos of what was happening or what they had done. And I went and investigated a little bit afterwards, and I saw like there were people who had uploaded videos on YouTube of like, here's my Diwali IKEA shopping haul, etc. And it was just one of those things where just a small part of their identity and culture, the brand identified that these people exist, and they were able to put something out that spoke to them and made them feel seen. They're not doing something that speaks to them all year long, but just that one little nugget, right, was enough for them to say, wow, they really get it.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I mean, it's the same as what you had mentioned about the lingerie brand from Rihanna, right? Having people
Mm-hmm.
from different race, different shapes and sizes, disabilities. I mean, it's a product that works for all these people. It's not that you're
Yeah.
trying to create the product so that it fits within that specific space. It's like it's a product that works for all, right?
Yeah.
And by doing that, you're also, as similar to the example you just given there, like having fashion shows as an example of with all shapes and sizes, disabilities, whatever it might be, is just that's getting out to people as well and making also people feel included, right? So somebody that might have a disability will see that and say,
Yeah.
oh, you know what, they get me. They know that, oh, maybe I can try that and I can be like that person there, you know?
Right, right. And
Yeah.
it's just wonderful to know that someone took the time to think of you in advance versus, you have this sort of cobbled together experience that feels very much like an afterthought. Nobody wants to feel like an afterthought.
For sure, for sure, and it's an inclusive thing as well. Like I think just generally across, at least in the states, right? We're based in Europe. I think Europe has a bit of work to do still on this, but in the states, with the with diversity and equality and inclusiveness, like DEI training, even happening in major organizations, this is a great thing, right? Like there was a simple and in real world like this is simple examples, right? So I think it was, I can't remember who it was. It might have been my brother or something. Friends of theirs are from like they're black, right? They've
Mhm.
got a young kid, right? And he wanted to go buy the young girl a doll or something, right? I think they
Yeah.
wanted to get a gift and needed to go to like many stores to try to find a doll that was black, so that the
Yeah.
kid was like, well, like why is there only white dolls? Like they literally asked in many stores, like, why is there only white dolls?
Yeah.
They're like, that's just how we make them, like,
Yeah.
and it and that like, look, I can't comment on it. Look at the color of me. I get sunburnt at nighttime. Like I'm like the moon gives me sunburn. I'm just but that dawned on me being like, okay, like put yourself into the shoes of that like little girl that
Yeah.
is seeing that from the very moment that she grows up. And it doesn't have whatever a doll, whatever, it doesn't matter, but can't connect to it fully, it's
Yeah.
completely, and we're seeing that get better and better and better as it goes.
Yeah.
And the more pressure that like brands start putting on that around, in the marketing as well, because that's obviously going to push consumer behavior, and the more consumer
Right.
behavior that's then pushing for that is ultimately going to end up in more inclusiveness across the board, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Like representation matters and it has an impact on people that goes far beyond the product that they're buying from you, right? But when people see themselves or who they aspire to be reflected in the imagery or even the products that your brand puts forth, it sort of gives them this permission slip to take that next step forward with you. And I think that, you know, um, more and more we're seeing brands identify different areas that or listening maybe even to the people that they're serving and identifying unmet needs and finding ways to sort of fill those gaps. So Walmart is like the largest retailer in the world. So recently, I think a couple of months ago, they announced sensory friendly hours. And that's in all the stores in the US and Puerto Rico. Hopefully they'll expand that in other places, but they've identified, they heard from their consumers that some people have kids or they themselves have sensory processing disorder. And it makes it difficult for them to go in a store. It's an overwhelming experience. So, and it's very common for people who are neurodivergent. And so it makes it a challenging experience. Let's say if they have a caregiver, you're a mom of a child. So they implemented these sensory friendly hours from 8 to 10 every morning. And so what they do is they dim the lights a little bit, they turn off the music. Whenever they on their TVs, they have a static image versus things changing. And for people who have to deal with sensory processing disorder or someone have a loved one who deals with it, they have an opportunity now to go into the store same as everybody else. Like there's still people who don't have sensory processing disorder who can go to Walmart at this time and they still have a wonderful experience. But just acknowledging that different people sometimes need different things. How can we alter or how can we make room or in design in the customer experience that we deliver, an experience that works for a broader group of people.
Without having to change the world either, it's small changes, as you mentioned already a few times, and
Right.
it's not like you're making every store at all times of the day that, right? Because that's going to be probably harmful to their business, perhaps, or who knows, right? It's just accommodating, as you said, right?
Yeah.
It's making some small
Yeah.
changes here and there that's accommodating. That's really, really good. Tell us a little bit about what the type of brands that you work with, Sonia.
So as you mentioned, because of my background in healthcare, I often do work with healthcare brands. But what I've found is that the principles related to inclusive marketing aren't necessarily like they're not vertical specific. So, I think I'm working right now with like a couple of agencies, marketing agencies, because a lot of times as they're doing the execution work for their clients, they need to have an inclusive lens and thought process as well. I'm working with some people in like the home improvement space right now. So it's a broad range of things like that of consumers. It's more so any brand who recognizes that they can do a better job serving the needs of people who are mainstream, they can benefit from these principles.
That's amazing. Okay, well, look, we're just on time now, Sonia. Where can
Yeah.
people find you?
They can find me at inclusionandmarketing.com. That's where you'll find the podcast. Of course, you can find the podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. There's a newsletter that I have, the Inclusion and Marketing newsletter. You can sign up for that on the website. And then I'm all on the socials under Sonia E. Thompson. So you can find me there as well.
Awesome. I'll make sure that that's all as well in the description and so people can find you in that. But Sonia, thanks so much for coming on. It's been great speaking. And if you ever want to come on again, let me know.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Perfect. Guys, this has been an episode, the first episode, in fact, of the Marketing Masters podcast. I got it right this time. Please tune in again next week for more great content. Sonia, thanks a million for coming on.
Thank you.